Destiny's crossroads.
Recently, I was lucky enough to go hands-on with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and although my playtime was largely dominated by combat encounters, this small slice left a lasting impression on me in regards to how events in the final game will play out. It, alongside the latest trailer, has all but confirmed suspicions that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is not going to go how we might all expect. A fascinating change in events during my demo, coupled with clues and patterns from Final Fantasy VII Remake, leads me to believe we could all be in for a shocking twist of fate for everyone's favourite flower girl. Here's 7 reasons why we think you'll be able to save Aerith during Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But before we dive into Rebirth, let's first set the scene for what happened in Remake. The first chapter in this trilogy initially presented itself as a retelling, but by the end had veered onto its own extremely meta path. Throughout Final Fantasy VII Remake, Cloud and his friends frequently encountered the Whispers, hooded spectres that Red 13 described as arbiters of fate. Their sole purpose is to ensure that destiny plays out according to plan, effectively keeping the events of the original Final Fantasy VII timeline on track. That would of course see villain Sephiroth defeated, but not before he takes out Aerith in the process. But the Whispers are now gone, slain by Cloud at the end of Remake. The future and the past is now very uncertain, something that was perfectly illustrated in Remake with the arrival of the very much still alive Zack Fair.
Come and get it!
It seems now that anything can happen. The very end of Remake even dubs what's to come as the unknown journey. So how does this all affect Rebirth? Despite the removal of Destiny's manipulators, at this point it appears things are still on track. Trailers suggest that Rebirth is sticking to the broad events of the original game. We've seen the same locations being visited, the same characters being met, and the familiar path being trodden. But no one is naive enough to believe Square Enix won't have a surprise or two lined up. And our prediction is that, this time around, Aerith will avoid her doomed fate. The events of Rebirth begins as the party leave Midgar and will end in the Forgotten Capital. Creative director Tetsuya Nomura recently confirmed this to the PlayStation blog, noting that the Forgotten Capital is where the greatest fate of Final Fantasy VII awaits you. He is, of course, talking about the moment where Aerith is killed by Sephiroth. Producer Yoshinori Kitase also noted in a statement that we know fans are dying to see one scene in particular, all but confirming that Aerith's death scene will be a part of Rebirth. Or will it? In that same statement, Kitase noted that there will be a rapid pace of major twists and turns. And so, much like the shocking finale of Remake, could Rebirth end in a huge twist? And could Aerith survive Sephiroth's attack? It's logical to assume Square Enix will follow the path it laid down with Remake, but what evidence do we have beyond the baseless assumptions that Nomura and his team are looking to disrupt our expectations? Well, there is another disruptor, who perhaps presents a more convincing argument. In Remake, it's more than heavily suggested that Sephiroth knows the events of the original Final Fantasy VII. Basically, he knows he's doomed to be stopped by Cloud. To arrange his own victory, he needs to change the timeline. We saw him attempt this previously when he tried to kill Barrett, but the Whispers stepped in to keep destiny in order. And so, that's why Sephiroth coaxed Cloud and the party to challenge fate. With the Whispers defeated, Sephiroth is now free to walk a new path and avoid his own defeat. So how could this lead to Aerith surviving? Well, Sephiroth knows that Aerith's death is a huge catalyst for Cloud and the group to begin their planet-saving journey. And so by not killing Aerith, Sephiroth can avoid Cloud going on a path of vengeance. That may sound counterintuitive, but there's an even more compelling reason for him to keep Aerith alive. In her final moments, Aerith calls on Holy, the white magic that prevents Sephiroth's meteor from destroying the planet. So perhaps, if Aerith lives, Sephiroth could manipulate her into using Holy for his own nefarious purposes. In Remake, it's not just Sephiroth who's hinted to know the events of the original story though. It's suggested that Aerith does too.
But this isn't the way it's supposed to be. There's no greater threat to the planet than him.
She's presumably not going to be very happy with that version of events and wants to do everything she can to survive. It may be that Rebirth is a battle between heroes and villains who already know the path of destiny, with each trying to do everything they can to twist a new fate into something that benefits them. Aerith knows her sacrifice eventually leads to Sephiroth's defeat, and so it seems likely she'll need to formulate a new plan in which she can both survive and ensure his demise. Perhaps we'll be in for a story in which Aerith calls Sephiroth's bluff, coaxing him into a false sense of security by staying alive, then thwarting his plans in a way that adds a brand new story layer to this reimagined version of Final Fantasy VII. It may be that Square doesn't subvert expectations and instead sticks to classic events, but even if Aerith does die in Rebirth, she could simultaneously survive. Thanks to the destruction of the Whispers, a second, altered timeline was created in which Aerith's old boyfriend Zack Fair survived. It seems like we've seen moments from this new reality in Rebirth's trailer, such as this scene where Avalanche are captured by Shinra in Midgar, something we know that didn't happen during Remake. Katase confirmed to IGN that there will be a new episode with Zack that will contain even more of him than the remake. It stands to reason then that this altered timeline will play a major part in the events of Rebirth. With Zack alive, Cloud won't be able to assume his false identity and fall down the soldier rabbit hole. And so perhaps it's Zack, not Cloud, who joins Avalanche in this reality. And from there, perhaps this version of the party's journey completely avoids Aerith's tragic fate. Maybe all it took was for Zack to survive and to secure a more hopeful future for Midgar's Flower Girl. We know that we're going to see two timelines play out in Rebirth. It makes sense that one will feature more radical changes than the other. Perhaps we'll see two fates for Aerith, and a story that makes it clear which path of destiny is the most important for Midgar's Flower Girl to tread. Perhaps Zack's timeline will be the one with the most changes, but my hands-on showed that the regular remake timeline will continue to undergo several key alterations. When I arrived at Junon, the classic bottom swell boss that attacks Priscilla on the beach has been reimagined. In Rebirth, the boss, now renamed Terror of the Deep, is actually attacking Yuffie instead. This location is now where Cloud and the party will meet the Materia Thief for the first time, which is entirely different to how Yuffie is recruited in the original game. If the events at Junon are now different, then there's every chance that the events at the Forgotten Capital will be too. When discussing the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, it's important to remember that the name Remake has a double meaning. It doesn't just refer to Square Enix remaking an old game for a modern console. It also symbolises the character choosing to remake their own destinies. The Final Fantasy VII timeline has literally been remade, and so it should be assumed that the name Rebirth will also represent multiple concepts. In an interview with IGN, Katase explained that the name was thought of as the next iteration that also kind of encapsulated this sentiment of reimagining or recreating. That explains the development side of the title then, but what about the in-game meaning? A resurrection could also be considered a rebirth. Perhaps then, just like Barrett, Aerith can be resurrected. During his final confrontation with Cloud in Remake, Sephiroth delivers a cryptic message.
7 seconds till the end. Time enough for you, perhaps. But what will you do with it? Let's see.
It's a confusing monologue, but it could well be another piece of evidence that points towards Sephiroth knowing his future. During the Forgotten Capital events of the original game, it takes exactly 7 seconds for Sephiroth to fall from the sky and impale Aerith with his sword. And so it seems like Sephiroth is taunting Cloud. He'll just have 7 seconds to intervene and save Aerith. Will Cloud ever learn what Sephiroth meant? Will he have time to formulate a plan to prevent Aerith's death? Do those 7 seconds definitely refer to this climactic moment? I guess we'll have to wait till Rebirth to find out. And those are 7 reasons why we believe Aerith could survive in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Do you have any theories of your own? Have you spotted even more evidence in the trailer that we've missed? Let us know in the comments. And for more on Aerith and Final Fantasy VII, why not check out our documentary about the resurrection of Aerith, including all the urban myths and the fans that have been desperately trying to bring Aerith back to life for the last 25 years.